Service, soil and water conservation districts, but really kind of a big tent idea. If you're interested and you want to join, how can we work together? In my mind, all lands, maybe those are a little blurry, but it's also about multiple benefits and outcomes. So it's about improving wildlife habitat. It's about managing forest composition. It's about providing forest products, improving riparian forests, managing hazardous fuels. So it's really kind of what is this basket of benefits we can provide. That's really the space the Forest Service is working in a lot of the time. I'd also add that it's a voluntary thing. So who is willing and interested to come to the table? That's a little bit what is all lands management. Why do we think it's needed? Well, everybody may have their own perspective on that. On the Superior National Forest, we're doing good work out there, but we feel that we're not fully meeting our management objectives. We're not managing enough acres at a pace to keep up with the needs we see out there. So one example of that, maybe an anecdotal one, there's forest out there that is declining. The tree regeneration isn't very good, and perhaps there's too many acres of that, and that's not meeting our management objectives to have too much of that in the landscape. And can we work with partners so we can catch up to those needs? And can we accomplish more together than we could separately? And all lands, again, it's not a new concept. And there's examples of collaborative projects out there. You've got the North Shore Forest Collaborative, Manitou Collaborative, and others just in Northeast Minnesota. But how can we make this our regular way of doing management and not just a special project here and there? Okay, so there's a vision. This is a vision statement we came up with on forest anyway. It's not, maybe others have different ideas, but so it says all lands management in Northeast Minnesota is an efficient, effective, and regular way for landowners and managers to more fully accomplish shared and individual management goals and objectives. All lands management in Northeast Minnesota is synergistic, allowing for greater accomplishments collectively than could be done separately. So that kind of encapsulates what we're talking about. One thing I would add, it can take a lot of investment up front to get all lands management going. There's a lot of work with coordination, collaboration. So we acknowledge that, the staff time and so forth, but hopefully that pays off as you do projects. In Minnesota, we're fortunate to have an infrastructure in place, which I think is about all lands management, namely the Minnesota Forest Resources Council, and there are landscape coordination committees around the state. Here in Northeast Minnesota, we have our Northeastern Committee, and there's a landscape plan, which really is an all lands landscape plan. So we should be looking to that as we implement all lands, and the implementation is where we have progress to make. So on the all lands planning, I thought it was interesting. Howard was in an earlier presentation in this room was talking about it's at that project planning level that you have a 100,000 acre project area or a 500,000 acre project area. If you collaborate, maybe you can get some benefits at that level. And I think that's a key place to do all lands. So I think what that involves is at the beginning, when you're planning a project, we're sitting down together, multiple partners, not just inside your own organization or agency. The traditional way is you plan it all by yourself, then you send it out for review and comment, and then you kind of move forward. And instead, this is, let's design it together from the beginning. And we're already doing that. We could do that more. Implementation. This is another great area of opportunity that we're moving forward on. There's more and more authorities and tools to do this. We've got the Good Neighbor Authority. The Forest Service is working with the state on that, and we would like to bring in the county as well. Agreements with the Nature Conservancy, coordinating on-the-ground work. Maybe to create a viable timber sale, you've got a piece of land on the national forest, a piece of land on the state, a piece of land on the county. You add it together, maybe it becomes a more viable timber sale. And then that it definitely extends through road management and reforestation and silvicultural work. So we can gain efficiencies by coordinating more during implementation. Inventory and monitoring is key to this. Chris Beal gave a presentation earlier on the all-land stand mapping, and that can really help us collaborate and design projects together. So that's another key place we can make progress. Okay, so one way we're moving forward on all lands is the Arrowhead Landscape Project. It's a new collaborative that is forming. It's a vegetation management project to deliver multiple resource benefits, and we want to do that in an interdisciplinary way to accomplish that. And we use that as an example for further projects in the future. I'll just wrap up. This is a project map. It's in northwestern St. Louis County. And again, this Arrowhead project is in the very early stages. And the collaborative group is forming, and then we're going to be putting together those shared management objectives. So, thank you, and I will go to the next person and let me.
Okay, yeah, trip there. Thanks, Peter. So next we have Myra Timer. So you had slides, right?
Superior National Forest, but I'm also a member of the executive committee of the North Shore Forest Collaborative. The collaborative was formed in 2011 as an association of agencies and environmental organizations and private landowners that share a common vision for land stewardship. So the collaborative area is approximately 270,000 acres and encompasses Lake and Cook County, and it runs all the way from Knife River all the way up to the Canadian border and about 3 miles inland. The North Shore used to be a more conifer-dominated forest with pockets of cedar and white pine, but it was heavily logged, and then fires burned through it in the early part of the last century. It came back naturally to aspen and birch, but now those trees are at the end of their lifespan. So natural regen of these particular species, such as cedar and white pine, have not come back as much, and then we have a lot more brush and grass coming in. The collaborative has 3 main goals: restoration, collaborating, and educating. Our emphasis is to plant long-lived conifers and to reduce some invasive species. In 2014, the collaborative was instrumental in helping the Superior National Forest and the Department of Natural Resources receive a $400,000 grant from the state of Minnesota's Conservation Partners Legacy Grant. We went into those older stands and we removed the brush and hardwood competition, and then we planted and caged the trees because we've had a lot bigger increase in hare and deer population. Then in December, we just got word that we got another $250,000 grant to do similar work. We're going to expand a little bit and do work in riparian areas along aquatic management areas for the state, and also in the wildlife management areas, and then also on Forest Service land. In 2015, the Department of Agriculture offered a program with the federal government, the Forest Service, and then the Natural Resources Conservation Service to work together to do large-scale landscape restoration work. We hired a forester through an interagency agreement, and then that individual implemented restoration activities similar to what we've been doing with the Conservation Partners Legacy Grant. But also work with private landowners through the NRCS in order to help them do site visits and give them tools about how to restore their lands. We're in the 4th year of our landowner deer fence program. A grant from the Weeks Family Foundation supplies funds to pay for fencing material so that landowners can get a better rate on buying that fence, which is expensive, and then they can plant and they can plant and cage trees. So these folks did that work, or we got 250 landowners to participate in the program, and they planted 6,500 trees and caged them, but they've also on their own planted an additional 30,000 trees. So the lessons that we've learned is that each agency has their own regulations and rules, and progress can be really slow, and then also it can be really frustrating. So the way we kind of tackled that for us was we conducted some more field trips, which took effort on our part, but it really educated more folks and line officers about the importance of what we're doing, and they then moved forward to help us get through the red tape. So the other thing is that earning public's trust. Finding the right fit for our partners was important too. So we utilized the Sugarloaf North Shore Stewardship Association to be our fiscal agent. So that really streamlined the process for us. And when it comes to public trust, they won't do it just because you say it's good. So they were really excited about this deer fencing program, and they could see other homeowners doing it, and they could get a benefit immediately, and that was really important to them to do that. So in general, we've learned that working together, we can get more work done. And the other thing is that we learned to get along with people, and we were able to have a better time doing it together. Thank you.
Thank you, Myra. So up next, we have Chris Dunn. You have a presentation, right?
There should be one.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Minnesota Moose Habitat Collaborative in 5 minutes. I'm Chris Dunham, Forester with the Nature Conservancy. I'm going to stick to Jody's talking points here of background, value, lessons learned, keys to success. Okay, so just a quick background on the moose situation, why we ended up with this Minnesota Moose Habitat Collaborative and how we've been successful in getting funding. So taking you back through the population in northwest Minnesota crashed in the late 90s. Then they stepped up to monitoring in the northeast population, found some similar numbers that were not promising. Some of it mirrored the northwest, so obviously we have a problem. Legislature directed DNR to form the Moose Advisory Committee back 2006 or 8 or so, and to also come up with a moose habitat research and management plan. So that came out in 2011. About that time, we had a Northeast All Lands Committee had been formed, and it was the leaders from mostly agencies and the Nature Conservancy, and it was around kind of a first cut at all lands management. How do we manage across landscapes? How do we bring in some of the funding that would really enable us to do that at a larger scale? And that worked well with the onset of the legacy amendment and outdoor heritage funds being available. So through the collaborative or the management plan, habitat was one of those things that came out as something that we can actually get out there and sink our teeth into. You know, there were many other recommendations. One was deer populations and things that's hard to just go out and really do right away. But some of these habitat elements of forage and cover, we can certainly go out and do that. And I think we'll start with some of the lessons learned right away. A lot of us getting together talking about that. We're talking about habitat at a broad scale. Nobody really wants to step up and really manage for a single species. We kind of thought we were past that and ready to talk about habitat management. But some of just the politics and information coming out from the Outdoor Heritage Council, it's like, hey, you know, we've got this moose decline, and that's a species, and people can really get behind that. So, you know, that was a good piece of advice to do a project that still manages habitat at a large scale, but we have this poster species of a moose. So that really helped us secure the funding. So starting in 2012, the Minnesota Moose Habitat Collaborative we've been funded in 3 phases. So now we're funded through 2021, $5 million total, and the result will be 15,000 acres of habitat enhancement. That's kind of, depending on what we can get done, Forest Service prescribed burns could really give us a shot in the arm of acres, so we really hope we can get some of that done. We'll go through the list of partners, big list, and everybody's been really involved and great. It's kind of a fight for me to be able to stand up here today, so thankful for everybody that let me do that. Several folks are in the room here, but Minnesota Deer Hunters Association, they were the grantee for the project, so they are working on all the reporting and dealing with the council. The Nature Conservancy, Lake County Forestry, the Forest Service, Superior National Forest, St. Louis County, DNR, both forestry and wildlife have been involved in some degree. Fauna Life Band, Grand Portage Band, 1854 Treaty Authority, and NRI. So a couple of things, results, now looking at sort of value out of the collaborative. We're getting stuff done on the ground. Hard to tell, that top right photo is winter shearing, which we're doing quite a bit of, and that's sort of the forage piece. So winter shearing, hydroax, brush saw work, some prescribed burning, and then cover is the other habitat element that we're trying to promote. So that's really managing for mixed forest and conifer restoration, and we're doing that with planting and then all the necessary tending. So more value. So moose are using the sites. NRI did some work, and we've got documented, you know, folks out there looking at browse, and moose are using the sites. So that's awesome. That's kind of our primary deliverable for the grant, so cool. Next thing, tree species diversity has increased on the sites. So that's like better yet, even if the population continues to decline, we've still got improved habitat out on the ground, whether moose are using it or somebody else. We certainly are increasing tree species diversity. And then the big thing is this, what I just call next level collaboration. I mean, we've been at the collaboration business for 10 years or more now. A lot of it's, you know, it starts at small scale and trying to define roles and figure out, feel out the partners. But with this project, it's been super great that we can really have proven that we can get work done at a large scale, working together, and we know who to go to for what, and really make this stuff happen on the ground. So lessons learned, I think we've kind of, with the moose project, with having that, you know, a few $million bucks, it's been cool to look at each other and be like, hey, this is really working. We're getting a lot of work done on the ground. The money's getting spent. We're funded for another phase. We've been funded for 3 phases now. So just the fact that we've worked the bugs out of the collaboration, and now we've got this mature collaborative that can really get work done on the ground. Keys to success. getting stuff done is a huge key to success. And that's something that really, we recognized in the early days of a lot of meetings and talking, that was kind of necessary, but nothing really drives that collaboration and inspires the funders like getting stuff done on the ground, you know, that you can really do something and go out and walk around on it. And this map here, you see that all these red dots are sites. So to date, we've got about 10,000 acres of sites that we've worked on. And a lot of those sites, we've had to do multiple things on there, but I feel like that's a pretty impressive result for, you know, a few years of works. And we definitely couldn't have done that if we were still stumbling over like, well, who's going to do what, and who's going to manage the contracts on the ground, and do we have permission to work on this agency, and all that stuff is just in place so that now we can just really roll with this. Then the next step is to go walk around on it, you know. And I think both Peter made a good point about making this stuff a regular way of business, which we're doing. That's been key. And then Meyer talked about getting out there and having field trips. How much time do I have?
We're kind of done.
Well, that's why it was a battle to get here. So thank you very much.
And we'll have the panel discussion
Yeah.
for questions. So yeah, if you have other thoughts to share. Okay, so our next two people don't have presentations. They're just going to visit. So if somebody wants to turn the lights up, we can probably do that. That would help us all stay awake and pay attention. Our next person is up is going to be Rich Cortemash with Aiken County.
After you is David.
Okay, Dan's not here.
No, Dan Stewart is not here.
All right. Yeah, everyone's tired of slides. I just want to say that Minnesota is an incredibly lucky place to be working. We have all lands. We have an all lands approach and have for 30 years. We've been working together. We've had collaboration. I really like some of the tones and some of the terms I've heard about making cultural connections. I mean, there's a lot of students and in this here today and in the group, and I think there's been a loss of where we've been. Minnesota has an all lands approach through the Forest Resource Council, and Peter mentioned that, and I'm grateful for that. Back in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of cultural issues about the environment and logging and industry and water quality and everyone was in their own little camps. And the whole, I'm old enough to actually remember when terms like multiple use management were coming out. And I think we're living in a new era. We are working together across boundaries, forestry and wildlife and water. And I think we have a lot to thank for the Forest Resource Council for it. I mean, the time of distrust and the generic environmental impact statement, it's all kind of behind us, and we're moving forward, and we're making better collaborations. We're working across boundaries. The Forest Resource Council broke up the state into regional committees, regional landscape committees, and those regional committees are bringing together the feds, county, state, private landowners, mindsets from industry to environmental groups. And we're coming together, we meet quarterly, and we talk these issues out, and we put together a landscape plan. I'm chair of the North Central Landscape Committee, and that plan is an amalgamation of all kinds of ideas. It's a clearinghouse. It's not just an atlas, a map, a book of what we have in an individual region, but it's a shared vision with objectives and work products and measurable outcomes that are projected across boundaries. And we meet, we talk, we discuss these things, and I think it's incredibly valuable to understand the mindset of different land managers, different environmental groups, and putting it all together, piecing it together into a plan that covers the economics, the environmental, and very importantly, the cultural social part of our shared industry, our shared profession. And it works away some of those distrusts that had lingered before. These action items actually start projects, and I wish Dan Stewart was here. The first generation plan of the North Central landscape had a lot of distrust in forestry and water. We are blessed with an incredible water resource, Mississippi River, lakes, rivers, and streams. And then we have so many lakes, and so many people enjoy coming up to the North Central region for recreation and their water. And forestry was just that edge that just kind of rubbed people. That first generation plan talked a lot about protection, talked a lot about best management practices and separating the two. Times have changed. And we're finding this new landscape plan has actually brought water and forestry together as partners. DNR has done some research that talked about 70% of a watershed, if it's in working forest, you can pretty much guarantee that you've got some quality in that lake, river, or stream. And though that kind of discussion starts people realizing, okay, if it's not forestry, then it's going to be agriculture or housing. And so all of a sudden forestry is now a partner in water quality issues. And we see projects stemming up. The Mississippi Headwaters Board has moving the needle, having done the GIS and all these data things that we're seeing, put together great data sets that allow people to evaluate the landscape, and if we can put some kind of protections to ensure that we're keeping these areas in working forest, then we can protect the water quality. So it's been really fantastic to watch these COLAs, these lake associations, and these water groups come to us and say, let's have more forestry. Let's get Pheasants Forever out there and do conservation easements. Can we have projects that increase private woodlands management? Can we get more land management, private woodlands management plans together? And we have projects that promote getting more private stewardship plans together. The landscape plan as a whole covers all of these issues, and I love the concept of put it out there, take what you need. This is a clearinghouse of ideas. I mean, sometimes you might run into a mindset that what that person's saying just doesn't click with me. It doesn't fit with my agency, or it doesn't fit with my ethos. That's okay. You can take what you need. And that's why this landscape plan has been so powerful to make connections across boundaries. Beside the water quality project with the Mississippi Headwaters Board, Bowser is taking that and prioritizing wetland lakes around their Cisco lakes and some of their other rice lakes, and they're prioritizing it based on working forest. And there's this toolbox approach that Dan Stewart talks about, and I wish he was here to talk about it, because it really goes from fee ownership all the way down to just having good conversations with landowners. And that's spelled out in the landscape plan. One more set of things I want to mention. The landscape plan is a public document, and like I said, we meet quarterly. The best part of it is an open forum. We want people there. Superior's there, Chippewa's there, all the counties are represented, private landowners are represented, forest consultants are represented, forest industry, loggers, but it's an open forum. If you're interested, what a great place to have this clearinghouse of discussions and ideas. The tribes have really opened my eyes on what their management concerns are and how we can integrate those across boundaries.
Thank you, Rich. And if you weren't at the banquet last night, Aiken County got our Wildlife Society Conservation Award for all their great work. So I can give Aiken County a little applause. All right, our next person up is David Schmidt.
All right. Thank you, Jody. And so I'm here kind of representing a group from Southeast Minnesota that's been doing work in mostly the Root River watershed for about the past 8 or 9 years, and has kind of grown and expanded to other parts of Southeast Minnesota too, especially the Whitewater River watershed. It's a story that's a little tricky for me to represent in a sense for 2 main reasons. One is that it actually predates my arrival in a professional capacity on the landscape. So some of what I'm going to be sharing is picked from the brain of my boss, who's also my predecessor in this job, and some of the other partners too. And the other thing that makes it a little tricky to talk about is that unlike some of the other examples that we've heard about today, this sort of effort or this initiative now didn't have an official launch. It didn't have any meeting where we sort of officially kicked it off. But as I understand it, basically happened when a couple of people got together and sort of said, man, we should really be working together. And yeah, all right, fine, maybe we can meet on that and figure it out. And so I'm not actually sure exactly what the date it started was. It happened really organically. The earliest planning document I could find was from 2011, where it was basically a mission statement and a set of actions and priorities attached to a set of names and a map. I think it was 5 or 6 pages. My boss shared it with me as I was preparing this talk. And it really, so in that early initiative, it focused on, like I said, the Root River watershed, which just for some background, since I know not everyone here might be super familiar with Southeast Minnesota, it's essentially the southeastmost major Huck 8 in Minnesota, so it is that very bottom corner of the state. It's about 4 hours just due south of here, cutting through Wisconsin. 1 million acres, 97% of which is private. But in spite of the fact that it's maybe 3% public or conservation lands, has 111 different state-listed rare plants and animals, spread over 353 different sites of biodiversity significance according to the MDS. So the Root River, like a lot of the driftless landscape, and the Bluffland subsection is one of the most, if not arguably the most, sort of significant areas for biodiversity in the state of Minnesota, just based on number of rare, threatened, endangered species of greatest conservation need, and also general diversity. I think something like 51% of all plant species found in Minnesota can be found in the southeasternmost 11 counties of Minnesota. And that really speaks to the fact that it's a border ecoregion, so we have really high biodiversity. But this incredibly rich, diverse landscape, again, is incredibly underprotected from a sort of conservation standpoint, in that it is 97% privately owned. And this group got together and basically wanted to talk about how they could work together and really focus on, in this somewhat challenging landscape with a heavy component of agricultural land use and sort of competition for land use in the agricultural sense, focusing on managing to protect that biodiversity in there. And they started off looking at, sites actually identified through a nature conservancy planning process, and that was also based heavily on some of the MBS maps. And where are the most important places? Where do our interests overlap? A lot of the lessons that we've heard about today. They did that in 2011. They came up with that 6-page map. A few years later, they worked with the Minnesota Forest Resources Council and put together the Root River Landscape Stewardship Plan, which added a little more formal structure to it. It also added a lot more pages to the plan. I think that jumped up to like 110 pages or something like that. So it really amped up that sort of planning infrastructure. And then they really kind of worked together to focus on what actions do we really need to take to protect what's, sort of causing this or supporting the diversity in the area. Who can do what, and what's the best way to kind of make it happen together. Out of that's what's grown a couple things. One is a really successful partnership between TNC and DNR doing a lot of bluff prairie restorations. And that's used partly TNC's OHF funding and also DNR non-game wildlife's competitive state wildlife grants. And that's been really great because it can we can work on public land, they can work on private land. It's also really fueled a lot of the planning prioritization around the protection work that TNC's been doing in collaboration with Minnesota Land Trust and the Trust for Public Land. So some basic stats on what we've done. I can say that from TNC's perspective, that OHF work has resulted in over 3,000 acres of new public conservation land in a woefully underprotected landscape, 500 or 600 acres of habitat restoration, depending on kind of how you count it and which rules you use to count it. And that's just our side. That's actually, I wasn't able to get numbers from Jamie Edwards on the DNR side. In terms of what has made this productive, I think there are a couple takeaways, and it's really hard to add to what's already been said because we've really been talking a lot about successful partnerships here, and a lot of the bases are covered. But a couple things is one, that accountability. So like I said, that first main plan was actions, priorities, and they were attached to names. And so the fact that there were clearly assigned roles for everyone, where everyone knew exactly what they could do. And sort of like was mentioned earlier, I think with the with one of the previous examples, they were tied to our organization's strengths. And some of those were institutional strengths. TNC doing landowner outreach, non-game wildlife, who had been doing surveys on some private lands, already had landowner connections, versus some of the management expertise within wildlife or division of forestry. Some of it was simply funding access. So non-game division was able to work with Wisconsin to put together a strong application for the competitive state wildlife grant, focused around timber rattlesnakes. I think the group attempted an OHF application once with DNR as the lead, and it kind of internally got swatted down for some other DNR priorities. And so TNC was able to put one forward with us as the lead author and kind of present in that case. And then that one got funded. So matching just, which organizations are able to track down which funding streams, I think is really important. We've talked about funding as a key component for all these things to work and actually get stuff done. That was certainly true here, but I think another important point is the diversity of funding sources. So when you have multiple agencies, they're able to add their own capacity. But then when you're able to attract a diverse suite of funding sources and grant funding sources, one, it's going to be more stable just over time, right? This is the same reason we like biodiversity in a way, is you get that sort of stability from diversity. But the other thing is you get the flexibility to do things like match funds that can work on public land to funds that can match on private land, and that helps you cross those borders. Just a couple other things too that maybe hasn't been highlighted as much as we've talked about getting together. I think one thing that's easy to overlook in terms of a successful group is just the fact that everyone involved was excited and committed. So a lot of the people that were there, the group that got together and had this happen organically, it happened because people didn't hear about some initiative that was kicking off and figured, well, okay, I should probably go and be there and represent my agency. It was people who got together because they really wanted to go do something. And also, they were the practitioners, so the boots on the ground were in the room for that afternoon. And some of them were getting antsy from being inside too long. But afterwards, you had buy-in from the people who actually had to go out and then, do the work, knock on the doors, paint the trees, etc. And so I think that really mattered, just recognizing, it's not enough to have the right hats in the room, but they have to be on the heads of people who want to be there and are excited to do the work. And that gave that group multiple sort of champions. They kept momentum going. Having multiple different people who were willing to work as champions really helped bridge some turnover. Like I said, I came in halfway through, and it was great. Jamie Edwards, who had been with non-game and is now the Whitewater Wildlife Management Area Supervisor, while my boss was transitioning over to me, Jamie just kept plugging ahead and then was able to grab me by the scruff of the neck and throw me on the projects. So, having that group that works together well in that sense, where it's not just one person who's pushing everything forward, makes it really stable. And then the other piece is success begets success. So as this is built and grown, what started off as just a smaller group of the people who bothered to show up and sort of talk to each other about it being important. Now we are sort of formalizing into a conservation focus area down there, and we're adding more NGOs, and more NGOs are asking to come to these meetings now. We've added sportsmen's groups. And so it's built because there was momentum from actually getting successful actions out on the ground. So that's probably coming. All right.
That's good, thanks.
All right, thanks, David. So we'll have our panel open